Outreach Directors Luke Gleeson and Heather Hatch.
Unfortunately, our other two panelists, Diane Abel, who you just witnessed in the last film, she's okay, but she's not well at the moment, and thought it was best to stay home. And unfortunately today, it sounds like Chief Pierre was also unable to join us, and so we send our best wishes to both of them. But we still have both directors with us, and I'm sure we can still provide them with a very typical KDocs welcome and Q&A. We pride ourselves on the quality of our Q&As. We have an excellent audience that is always very engaged with the films and the filmmakers. Yes, right here. So Catherine right there has a mic for you.
I'm not sure I need a mic. Can you hear me?
We can, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, probably without it. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for two amazing documentaries. I have a much deeper understanding now of the situation over what has already passed with the Bennett Dam and the challenges that you face with Site C. There was just one question I wanted to answer, and it's really more of a technical question for Luke. And I didn't really understand about the sort of sand levees and the silicon dust, where that had come from. Is it where the water's evaporated, or where did that fit in?
Is this on now?
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, so when the reservoir was first created, through the erosion events and stuff, you started to see a lot of different, the glacial till and everything that existed in that trench for a very, very long time. It started to, move around essentially with the different water levels and erosion events and stuff. So, and what happened was you eventually, because the drawdown is quite dramatic. So we're not dealing with just like a little bit of drawdown. We're dealing with extreme drawdown levels. And with debris and everything pounding out things, we have major erosion issues. We continue to lose wetlands. So a big part of what we do is we're trying to deal with the amount of sediment that's being exposed on the beaches. So what it's done is when it's at a very low drawdown, so the idea is to try to hit peak pool by the end of August, so you're at your sort of maximum level, which can cause issues, especially if there's debris against the reservoir, continuance of erosion. But then in the winter, when the electrical usage is up, you have that drawdown, and essentially in some areas you have like a floating ice bridge in different areas, and then in the spring it eventually collapses in different areas and becomes closer to what the original characteristics of the river would have followed. But year to year it does a lot of moving of that around. When it settles in the spring, what happens is when the snow and the ice disappears, you have that fine silicate on the top, so you have that very, very fine dust. And I was speaking about this earlier. During that period, it's very hard to capture that on film, because you can be standing in there looking across the reservoir and being like, wow, there's a lot of dust over there. But you're standing in the same dust. You just can't see it. And that's the stuff that's really dangerous and detrimental to health. So as you get further on into the season and more of the ice and the snow disappears, you start to have these big open beaches like you saw in the film. So the dust events that occur from that is essentially like a coarser sand, but there's still silicates in there as well. But that's where you see like when you have a real dust event, it's if you get caught in one, it's like impossible to see. So we filmed again. I did reshoots. I did a 5th shoot because I felt like we hadn't captured dust. It was really hard to capture those events because the day that we shot that with Ricardo walking through towards the camera where it's a whiteout, it was actually worse before we started rolling the cameras. But we had actually left the beach. It was a beautiful sunny day. It was calm. And we were driving back to Tsay. We had to grab some stuff. And I said, watch, as soon as we get to Tsay, there's going to be an event. Sure enough, somebody gets on the radio. Big dust event down on Middle Creek. So we rushed all the way back down there. We filmed maybe 3 minutes of that event. It had been going on for about 10 minutes before we showed up. You know, we got out there, it's like, yeah, people, like, they have to leave the beach in events like that for health reasons. So everybody's wearing masks, like Ricardo's wearing a mask. We got out there, by the time we got set up, we got off like 2 shots with Ricardo, one with him walking towards. When he walked past us, that event just died. So we almost missed that one. But it's, when the water level's that low and those beaches are exposed like that, it's, you know, depending on how much that water comes up and how quickly, it depends on how long we have to live with the dust and the impacts from the dust. So, well, we had a bad water year there about 4 or 5 years ago. We had dust events right into October, and you don't usually see that, but we didn't have a lot of runoff that year. And hydro had run it really, really low during that winter. So we didn't get to full pool when we'd expected to. So we still had some beaches that were open. So we were down there, and there was a break in the snow where it stopped snowing, and a wind event occurred on the reservoir. And we had people driving down and saying, there's dust events in October happening right now. So that's what we're dealing with. We're still trying to tackle ways to deal with it, but those beaches are massive. I mean, that one beach that you saw there is about 45,000 hectares, right? So, and there's a lot of open beach areas. So.
Thank you, Luke. Yes, Andrew. And after Andrew, there's another guest beside Andrew. You can be next.
Thank you both. Very powerful films. I guess I was going to ask that question, the first question, so it's been taken care of. Thank you. Kind of a minor question, I guess, for Luke. I was struck by the use of Born Free, the song Born Free, sung by the choir partway through. And my feeling at that moment was that that was the one satirical moment in the film. And I'm just wondering if that was, if my interpretation or my response is the one you were hoping for, or if you were up to something different there.
Yeah, so we had actually trying to warm up my voice here. I was a little rough in the keynote there. So yeah, so we'd actually initially done a couple of those different sort of interludes. We only picked 3 songs that weren't originally composed for the film. So David James McLeod, a good friend of mine out of Nelson, British Columbia, composed the film score. We worked for 2 years producing that film score. The other ones were essentially, the Niels Fromm piece was a piece that we had done for just the rhythm of the film and the storytelling. The Wagner piece was just a temp track to kind of help us with that rhythm, and we were going to actually write an original piece for that. It might have been a little over the top, but I always loved that song anyway, so I felt like it wasn't supposed to be like an evil empire sort of anthem. It just sort of felt really, really good. And then the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, we were just playing around with how we were going to do that piece, because there's just so much information, and we couldn't make a film with all the information. We were trying to tell a story. Our original cut of the film was 3 hours long. We knew it was not going to be 3 hours long. You know, we ended at 75 minutes. That took 2 years of constantly rethinking, breaking it down. And yeah, so for us it was a little bit, you know, it lent really well in sort of that whole, you know, the great accomplishments and the spectacular engineering feats, and you know, because it all felt so kind of ridiculous when you watch those old propaganda pieces. So it was a little tongue-in-cheek. We weren't sure if we were going to keep it in, but we just felt really strong about the edit. And so yeah, it was a bit satirical. It was sort of our version of a Hydro back to Hydro's version of what they were selling to the public earlier. And here's here are the results of all of your great efforts.
Thank you, Luke. And we have another guest there with a question.
First of all, thank you. Thank both of you for your work and for educating us. I have a couple of related questions to Heather. Okay. First of all, this is the first film on Side C that I have seen. Are there any other films on Side C?
I don't know. There was a lot of coverage and a lot of shorts, I'm sure, that were out there to raise awareness. But I don't know if there was a film.
Like a film,
Like a feature-length.
Feature-length film, yeah.
yeah, feature length.
These are the only two I know of. I mean, unless, there's lots of shorts and...
Yeah, lots of shorts, yeah.
Yeah. About full length, this might be the first one, right? Yeah. Anyway, I will check on that. My question is more, toward the end, the film mentioned that the trial, the judge ordered by 2023. I wonder if you know any update on that.
Yeah, I actually have an updated version. They didn't go to court. They did do a settlement behind closed doors. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that when they lost the injunction case in 2018 to stop destruction, I think it really impacted any future cases they might have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Not what I was expecting, but yeah. The other question is about the progress of Side C right now. And is the reservoir being filled, or when it's going to be filled? And what's the future of Side C as a project?
I can tell you that the valley doesn't look like it does in that movie. It took me a long time to edit it, so that's 2018 ending the footage there. The dam is much bigger. The trees are being burned on the side of the river, and that beautiful swamp, I don't know, wetland that you saw, the slough is gone. I know, I just saw in the news the other day. And they just put the first turbine in.
That answers that, huh?
Thank you so much.
I believe this gentleman here in the center has a question. Catherine can bring a mic to you there.
Yes. Hello. Again, thank you to you both for those films. It's really, as a settler person and part of a Fight C group as well, has been sort of fighting this for the last, I'm not sure, 8 years or so. It's really heart-wrenching and heartbreaking to see what's happening up there and what is still going on, and then particularly in your film, Luke, just to get that piece of the history as well. That the water keeps coming up, and we have to move, and it's just it's incredible that BC Hydro, I think they actually apologized for some of those impacts on the Tsay in 2016 or 17. They have some kind of a thing in Hudson Hope, I think, and of course, as they're apologizing, Tsay is being, devastation is continuing behind them. It's unbelievable that it has gotten this far, and I guess I'll never give up. This dam is not beyond the point of no return, this construction project. And hearing that fellow say, well, we had a few more people at Rocky Mountain at that time, because that was really the only time that people, that I'm aware of at least, where they blockaded and stood their ground. I know that many others would have wanted to and would have hoped for it. There's been so many actions. We saw that with the Yellow Stake. We've seen that with all the creative efforts that, whether through art or through these amazing films that you've done to help inspire and raise awareness. And now it's just, I hear Chief Roland Wilson talk about the mercury-infected water from Watson, in the reservoir, or the Williston Reservoir, I guess it is. And now, of course, will be on the piece as well. You know, I guess I'm sort of ranting here a little bit. It's just again appreciation. This is sort of it's fueled a bit more, you know, inspiration. See what else can we do? What else can we do to bring justice? Whether it's, you know, with the Treaty 8, it's unbelievable that is still going on. And yet we have government saying they're proud of their UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples legislation that does nothing. And we see this constant, you know, violation of treaties and Indigenous sovereignty throughout this province and, and across Canada. So I guess we just, you know, I guess I'm still looking for inspiration, and you're helping with that, and I appreciate that all the work and effort that went into that. And I guess I'm thinking, you know, Diane Abel in the last film, you know, just thinking of her and so many others that are just wondering what their future is going to be like. So anyhow, here's one voice that's saying this dam is not beyond the point of no return, and do whatever I can to change that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say a couple of things to that, actually. You know, well, First Nations were used to things taking a very, 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 very long time. We're used to the bureaucracy and the constant changes of policy and, you know, this ridiculous situation that we're stuck in between with the Indian Act and treaty nations, non-treaty nations is very complicated. You know, Dene Nation is not a treaty nation. We refused all treaties. We're an independent nation, and we are in a treaty process. We've been in that for almost 30 years, and you know, unless mandates change, co-development of mandates are implemented as they've been promised for a long time, unless this legislation of UNDRIP, unless the lawmakers and the politicians can actually wrap their heads around what that actually means, then it's not really relevant. I know some people think they're being quite progressive, but it's still quite paternalistic. I did want to mention, you had mentioned the apologies to Tsay Dene Nation and the visitor center there and at the W.A.C. Bennett Dam. You know, that was, I gave Hydro hell over that. That was quite disgraceful. We did not participate in that. We were told we'd get a wall, so we sent a poster that sort of showed all the areas where houses were burned and people were forced out and relocated to, and just this very simple statement saying, you know, due to the ongoing trauma and you know, impacts from this reservoir, we're unable to partake in this whatever it was, visitors thing or whatever. And then I went there, I was filming out there one time, and I went out there, and our wall was this big. It was on the very corner, and the poster was just this tiny little image, and you had to get up really close to see it. And they'd offered us at that time to make a short film, to give us a little bit of money to make a short film. I know KDocs Nation did. We refused. At the same time, they'd released the Power Pioneers Three Rivers book, and they were doing press presented to universities and all this stuff. And at that time, I was on council, and they showed up, and in between a break, they were there with the press, and they wanted to present us with this book and take pictures and everything. And so we kindly asked them to leave a copy, we'll read it. We don't want the press in our buildings. And there's like one page on Tsay Dene Nation. And we were quite insulted by that. And we were tired of people telling our story. And always coming from an outsider's lens. And it's happened to us before. People come in, talk to somebody, and they go out there and they report our history. So I was approached by a number of elders and members who said, we're ready to tell our story. So I took that to the nation, and we had a meeting, and what you saw from Dene Yi'injetl, Scattered a Man, was 100% fully funded First Nations feature film, fully funded by the nation, Tsay Dene Nation, complete independent First Nations feature film. And, you know, sometimes it takes a little bit of an insult to, you know, give you that juice to just say enough's enough. But yeah, the other piece too is the mercury. You know, we've been doing studies for years and years and years on mercury, quite recently as well. I did read the reports on the fish studies that Roland was referring to, and I don't really agree with the analysis. I mean, I was on the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program for over a decade. One of the big things that we were always pushing for was for, you know, fish studies, mercury studies. We've done a ton of internal studies. We've done a ton of sampling. And you know, when that reservoir was first created, you know, the reason we had so many issues with mercury was because there was so much debris, so many trees, so much timber left in the water. And as we've been cleaning and getting rid of that and cleaning that whole thing up, we are seeing a major decrease in the amount of mercury in the fish. Yeah, before you were told you could have one fish a year. So we also did a health study between Takla, Tsay, and Quadacha, and we did look at people's hair and different things and what people were eating and tracking diets related to fish, what areas they're fishing them out of as well. And then we did do a lot of fish sampling, and we've done a ton of that. Due diligence, just not just for fish and wildlife populations, but also for people's health. I mean, to date, you know, like, I mean, if you're eating up a river, that fish, you know, if you're eating bull trout coming up the Injinique out into Swanell, I mean, that fish has been out into the reservoir. And we've seen quite a major decline in the amount of mercury in fish. And I would say, you know, you're probably taking about as much of a chance on a can of tuna as you are on a bull trout these days. So, I mean, there still is definitely concern, and there should be concern when you've had that much contamination over the years. But we definitely make sure we monitor that, and so we're doing safe harvesting and also making sure that we're taking care of our fish and wildlife populations.
Heather, did you want to add anything in response to this gentleman's comments?
I have not spent time studying the methylmercury levels there. Yeah, I'm just, my characters are just saying what they're saying. I'm not gonna, I think it's great that you guys are continuing to monitor your environment.
Yeah, we use reference lakes and monitor those. And some of actually our reference lakes, I mean, there's naturally mercury in everything, right? So it's just understanding sort of what's a safe level of mercury. And some of our reference lakes, we were kind of a little bit surprised at some of the levels of mercury in some of those fish in those areas. So it's always just something that you know, we keep working on, keeping an eye out for, especially as other development comes into the territories, whether it's exploration, mining. We're constantly monitoring those impacts and you know, negotiating agreements to make sure there's certain standards set before people come in to the country. And if they can't meet those standards, we push really hard to make sure that they don't enter the country.
Thank you. Is there another question from the floor? Yes, in the back there.
Yeah, I wanted to thank both of you for the really deep and hard work of bearing witness to the violence of history. And also, I was really struck by the strength of the communities that have survived that. So seeing the families in scatterings and seeing, you know, Chief Roland and Diane Abel, Elder George Desjardins, and many others is really important. I think I have a question about moving forward, because I think it takes a lot of relationship building and time and the kind of effort that you put in to make these films for people to understand on a deep level, or a deeper, introduction to a deeper level, I should say. At the same time, there's a kind of urgency in terms of dams being presented as a greenwashing in terms of climate change responses. And so thinking kind of, so there is a film about the Tsay Dam that was called Peace Out. It was about 3 projects. One of them was the Tsay Dam. And the director, Charles Wilkinson, when he made it, we all thought at various times over our efforts to try to stop the dam that it would stop, because it was so obviously horrific, so corrupt, so offensive on so many levels. And it's been a really disturbing and upsetting lesson to see it continue and see that corruption continue, and the backflip that Horgan did as well. But the question I have is like getting the message out to people who won't take that time. I think there's 2 levels. Like, one is the relationship building. The other is, so Wilkinson, Charles Wilkinson, what he did after that longer film was he put out a short 14-minute clip. And it was basically like, if you don't have time to watch this whole long film, this is what you need to know about the dam. And so trying to reach people who won't sit there through a longer thing, but still need to know what the problems are. So it's a challenge, I guess, and it's not necessarily your work. It may be the work of the audience to figure out how to do that translation and how to get that message out there. But it's something I'm trying to think through together. And at the end of your film, Heather, you've got that incredible list of all the dams that are still being challenged, and the Elwha's coming down, for instance, the dam on the Elwha. So there is no point of no return when you can bring dams down. As far as I'm concerned, that I believe or pray that the landslides will take care of the dam, even though our governments have failed or been unable to do so. And anyway, but thinking about, for us in the room who sit with this knowledge and this responsibility to teach other people, I guess the question is, how do we get, and this is not necessarily for you to answer, but for all of us to think about, how do we get people to understand that big hydro dams are not a climate solution? Like, basically fighting the greenwash that has been used to put Site C forward, and has been used, I think, on Muskrat Falls on the East Coast as well. And I think Canada's climate change plan includes 100 more dams like that across the north of Canada, right? So-called Canada. And so it's, the battles hopefully teach us how to prepare for more battles to come. And I guess that's the question I have for you and anybody else in the room who wants to think about it. Like, what do we take forward to help educate governments that don't want to listen or don't want to learn?
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so the federal panel advisor Harry Swain had mentioned that, like, it's sort of this ingrained systematic sort of way of thinking, right? Like, we haven't evolved out of this boom bust economy that is British Columbia, and you know, it's definitely needed. And I mean, it's very difficult when the majority of decisions are made by, you know, constituent voters in the South. And you know, we have people definitely in the North, like as mentioned in her film. There's no shortage of work in some of those areas. I remember when the recession hit in 2008 or whatever. Everybody in the Peace region was like, "What recession?" They were booming up there. You know, they were paying $25 an hour starting wage at A&W. They couldn't get people to work at any of these jobs. It was booming everywhere. They have all the pipelines going on right now. The people can't find equipment operators. It's booming. So I mean, it's really, I think, an evolution of, you know, how people want to approach these projects. You know, and it's also a control issue. I mean, when you're dealing with the Crown Corporation, like they are supposed to be an arm's length. When you're negotiating sometimes with the Crown Corporation, it gets very mucky and blurry sometimes on who you're talking to. Or am I talking to the province or am I talking to BC Hydro? And we've had those issues in the past, and we've made them very clear. You know, you're a Crown Corporation. You're supposed to be dealing directly with us. The province deals with us separately as the province. So, you know, a lot of those complications obviously are quite evident in sort of putting these mega projects on, and you know, we always looked at the W.A.C. Bennett, you know, I mean, it was a provincial vanity project to put British Columbia in you know, on the map and sort of solidify, you know, the Bennett legacy. And it's a human problem. I definitely agree with when he said that. And you know, but we just need to evolve out of this boom bust sort of way of thinking in terms of how our economics work. We're dealing heavily with the logging up north. You know, like they talk about the caribou in the film. Those caribou have been more heavily impacted by logging, in my opinion, than that reservoir. I mean, the amount of logging and oil and gas for the Graham herd that they're referring to, Roland mentioned 219 caribou. I'm pretty sure he's specifically talking about the Graham. Those are heavily impacted by logging and oil and gas. On our side, we have herds that are stable, currently stable. We have one of the biggest herds in the province, but you know, we just finished a recent report. We've been working for years. We're like 20 years behind the curve in terms of being able to deal with the amount of volume and the excuses that the province uses for jobs, like this idea that forest health and the increase in the amount of volume. When you're doing volume-based logging, they're pulling out just as much green, if not more, than they are any sort of beetle kill. So we're having major impacts happening on very big scales, and it goes right back to that same thing. It's just like this inherent systematic way of thinking that's like ingrained in people, where it's like we don't even have 5-year plans anymore or development areas. You know, people are just freelancing across the board up in the north. And you know, for us, it'd be great to have a little bit more power in terms of like our voting processes, you know, and sort of decentralizing how some of these things operate, so we have a little more teeth. Our regional managers have no teeth. If a permit gets to their desk, it's their job to stamp that thing in approval. My job is to slow it down before it ever gets to that desk, so I make sure it either doesn't get to that desk or that development's done in a way that we see, you know, can work with us. But when you're dealing with that much volume, it's almost impossible to manage, because people are. The amount of undercut, and you know, from Canfor, Conifex, everybody else, they have massive amounts of volume, and they're pulling out trees left and right, an amazing amount, and they still have undercut. So now it's like, okay, well, how do we deal with these issues? We need to look at different things, like how do we change silviculture practices, our approaches to development, a number of different things across the board. Forest health, using fire, utilizing fire, putting it back on the land base, you know. But we're not there yet. The conversations have started, but like I said, it's a bureaucracy. So we're going to have those conversations probably another 10 years. It's probably going to take a lot more impacts from fire before people start kind of taking some of these things into like a place where there's legislative change. And this happens across the board. I think a big fight that people should be looking at is not just necessarily stopping a project when it starts, it's stopping the legislation that allows these things to happen, allowing some teeth back into the regions where people can say, well, no, this is not feasible, we need to stop this before and actually sit down and do some proper work here. But the way that it's set up, it's just not set up to do that. So when it gets to that regional desk, it's permitted, it goes through, and especially at the district level, if you're a district manager, you get a permit across your desk, boom, it's stamped. It means investment was put into development of creating that permit, so now it needs to move.
I could say something that's not so knowledgeable about how these things work. This conversation comes up a lot. People ask, because you know, there's a sad ending, and they ask me, what can I do now? And I think this pertains to what you're talking about, Luke, about evolution of thinking. It's like, I think for the first time, people are really starting to question the values that we're holding inherent. As a broad stroke, colonialism, for instance, is a way we see the world. So just to move forward, I think you start questioning why you believe something is right, because you have those choices to make for yourself. These kind of stories that we're sharing are to tell the truth and also to honor the people in these fights and in our families. But it's also to have you question what's happening around you, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interpretation. A story's a story. You know, we all have stories. And, you know, just allowing that story to get out there, I think is important in the first place. And then if it creates questions or, you know, an interest, that's one of the reasons why we didn't use any maps in our film or names or you know, anything like that. Because to us the story was more important than saying where a location was or what this was or what that was. I think it's really up to the viewer to go and do that for themselves. And, you know, like the idea, same thing, we were asked, well, why don't you make a shorter version that has, you know, it's like, well, no, that's not cinema. You know, if that's an information piece, there's other people that do that, and I think that, you know, there is a place for stuff like that. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming out from different First Nations companies, stuff like that, where they're doing that. They're giving you an information piece, a 7-minute piece, a 10-minute piece, a 5-minute piece, but it's the same thing. It's giving you some information, and then I think it's really up to the viewer. If you're passionate about it, then you'll find it. We have the world at our fingertips these days, you know. You don't have to go to the library and find a book. You can just go online.
Rita, did you have another question?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. And in the first film, the story with the old man, I loved how that came in and out of the history and the contemporary moments. And what I loved about it was the sense that we're part of this longer, bigger, older story, or that we're given a glimpse into it, you know. And so I think if Canada is to have any honor, which it currently doesn't, in my eyes, I think it, for newcomers or settlers or unsettlers, if we learn to fit ourselves into Indigenous stories and ways of being and knowing, as opposed to the other way around, which is what the whole bureaucracy that you're describing seems to be geared towards, like cramming Indigenous people into so-called consultation that's not really consultation, and basically out fighting them with paperwork, as well as, you know, just the story of the visitor center too, that was appalling. So I guess the stories, yeah, the question I have is about law and story, because there's law already here from the host nations, I think, and it's been broken repeatedly, and the treaties have been broken. Where they exist and where they don't exist, there's still a breaking of Indigenous law. And I think that maybe, I'm not sure, but I feel like your movies, or your films both have that implied in them. And it's up to the reader or the viewer to maybe figure that out a little bit. But I was wondering if you could speak to that question of law.
Yeah, well, you know, the laws of the land have already been broken. First Nations break them. And I think you see that in Heather's film, everybody's getting together saying, why are we doing this? Why are we talking? Why is this going on? It's because the laws of the land have been broken. We used to go all the way, like our people, like Rocky Mountain Portage, where the whole thing happened there. Like our people used to go down to Dunvig and all the way down to Lesser Slave to do trade, and we used to go all the way out to the ocean. We used to, you know, like we had major trade, you know, like trade routes everywhere and family connections. You know, I have a lot of family in halfway, but we have our own issues even between the independent nations who never signed treaties and Treaty 8. You know, like. There was a court case against us, and there's a lot of very, very unhappy people about that stuff. And so, you know, to us as First Nations, we need to be honest with ourselves as well. I mean, we're breaking our own laws of the land here by not even consulting ourselves and sitting down and doing things in the proper way. If you got that chin in this area, you got to respect that. These are things that need to happen. You know, we talk about fish and wildlife management. We have different countries, different territories completely. So we have different management practices in order to do that. But you don't just manage down a river and not have a conversation with people who live up at the headwaters. You need to know how that system works, and that's one of the reasons why we would go and travel and meet and gather and do all these things. not just to have, this sort of modern idea of a powwow and everybody getting together. You were holding serious talks about things you were seeing, stuff that was happening. You were gathering and having those lands management conversations. You were marrying people together to keep relationships strong between families and all these different things. And there were certain things you just couldn't do. They were completely taboo. And, poaching on somebody else's land is one of those things. And I think that, as First Nations, we need to be honest too, is look, we're utilizing a lot of that, and that's you mentioned breaking down the colonial mindset. We are utilizing, using a Supreme Court to put another First Nations, into court with them, to me is that's a colonialized mindset. That's just not how we do things. But I'm also, sometimes people don't like the way I talk because it's well, it's true. Look, we need to look at ourselves too. Look, we're leaders in our own territory, but we need to be able to have these conversations. We need to be able to be frank with each other, respectful, but honest, and say, look, we are having some major breakdowns of our own laws here that have not been happening for quite some time, that we need to get back in order. If we're going to sign treaties and create constitutions that are constitutions for your nation that somehow impede upon your neighbors and their neighbors, well, that's not our laws. That's not the laws of the land by any stretch of the imagination. There's gathering sites for reasons. There's reasons why suddenly the linguistics of an area changes to another. It's like I mentioned when we opened up here, it's how we identify with our country. The language we got from that country. That's how we identify with it. Anywhere you go in our country, it means something. Whatever anything is named means something. And it's usually because there's something there that provides for us, and then we give back to that. And I think that we need to, as First Nations people, need to start redeveloping those relationships and start having those conversations. Because if there's two nations fighting for Treaty 8, and then they have that meeting way later and they say we should be talking and doing this stuff, well, to me that shows that we are not upholding those pieces. We are not jumping and supporting each other. We are being more reactive than proactive. And if that's uncomfortable for people, well, I don't mind. I've had a few arrows in my back in my day, right? I'm tough, I can take it. But I think it's definitely something that if we want the government to respect our laws and our ways of doing things, then we need to be able to respect our neighbors and respect each other and reopen all of those relationships that we had in the past. I have family in Halfway, I have family in Fort Nelson, I have family in not Sycas, I got a Sycas friend up here. Nakaisley, Takla, we have family all over. And, us, we're Sekani Dene people, we're Sekani people of the mountains. But that didn't mean we just stayed in this area. We had vibrant, alive relations with everybody in our surrounding areas, and we had rules to those relationships, and we stuck by them.
You're actually just bumping up against a question that I actually had, which is, that really is sort of the colonial model though, right? Which is one of at least in my view, you're talking about building family relationships and connections, and that way of seeing the world as a worldview, which is completely the opposite of the sort of colonial capitalistic model, which relies on boundaries and divisions and exclusion. Because we need to know where the reporting lines are and who owns what and where do the profits go, and to the questions about so how do we go forward with that, I really feel, as a settler, I feel like the onus is on settlers and unsettlers, if you want to call them that, to understand the ways in which the system isn't broken. The system is working exactly the way it's designed to work. And I really come to hate that expression, the system is broken, we're failing our First Nations. Yeah, but we're not failing our First Nations because the system is broken, we're failing because the system is working exactly the way it was designed to work to break these nations. And I feel like we are missing out on our responsibility, first to educate ourselves by watching films like this and just even understanding stories. But you talked about needing to, what needs to be dismantled, and the way things have been so centralized, and the coalescing of power and wealth, and how intractable that has become. And I know, and Heather, what your film refers to, I think if I'm quoting it right, the political chicanery. It just seems like, you come at it from the right, we move the goalpost to the left. You come at it from the left, we just move the goalpost to the left. The story, the government will just tell a different story. And so I feel like until we can actually reorient the story and actually move away from the entire colonial framework, we have to find a new way of seeing.
Well, that's sort of what, people are looking at, like the triple R policy and UNDRIP, and those things are supposed to sort of, help, in terms of like getting people out from underneath the Indian Act, right? Well, I mean, if you look at First Nations, we're communist meritocracies. The nation owns everything, but the nation is the people, so it's 99.999. So you don't have access to marketplaces. You can own your house, but you don't own the land under it. There's no value to that. And they've done that in some First Nations. So CMHC tried to do this project where they say, well, you can buy your own houses, you pay your mortgage, whatever, you own your houses in 20, 30 years or whatever. And I know some nations in BC had done that, and well, it's great. Okay, they paid it off, they own the house, but they have no access to the market because they can't sell that house for a value because there's no value to it. There's no assessed value to your investment. So it's a false investment. If you sold that house to a non-First Nations in that area, well, then they'd now have to negotiate through leadership for access to the land, which would be like a 99-year lease, which they're doing everywhere. So you're really, there's no incentive, because we don't have access to the market. But everybody owns everything the same, and so there's benefits to being a member, tax-free exemption, et cetera, But the meritocracy part is, well, if you work hard and do this, whatever, well, you can make more. So we're not all the same, but we don't own anything, but we're just not all the same. The nation will provide, but you can go and do better if you want to. But if you leave here, you're on your own. And, reserves and the idea of keeping people there. I mean, I got a number, 609-003-0401. I'm a registered Indian under the Indian Act of Canada. I got a special little number goes with me, and then it's like, stay on your little reserve. And if you want to travel around, you can use this little card. We'll give you a tax exemption. We'll give you an exemption on your fuel. All these things. Well, but stay there. Well, I mean, that's apartheid, right? I mean, keeping people isolated, limiting their travel. They didn't want us to travel and keep those lines alive because that was a powerful trade. We were the strongest economies in British Columbia until the development of the Indian Act, when they restricted us from accessing markets. You didn't have to assimilate us. This BC would have been fine if you just kept working with us. But, it's to this day, some people, like, it drives me nuts when kids say the res. It's like, look at your country. You're surrounded by 3.2 million hectares of mountains and rivers and lakes and beautiful valleys, and, there's nobody up here but us. And you're talking about the res. It's like, get out of your colonial mindset and get back into like the freedom that you have as an individual. It's like removing that freedom of individuality keeps you in a bubble. And if you're scared to speak up or say whatever, then you may not move out of that bubble. You might just stay right there because all of a sudden that's a safe place to be.
Or, your colonizer creates and manufactures the conditions whereby it actually is unsafe for you to leave your environment, even when you want to leave, like if they can manufacture the conditions such that it actually is unsafe or untenable for a person to leave, and you can come at them from both ends.
Well, that's one of the elders in your film said that. I don't think I'll go to Fort St. John anymore.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So when people first were I mean, I was up the Messalinka River at my house, and my grandpa Bob, he's in the film, Bob Pierre, and he's going to be 93 this March. And we were sitting up there. This gives you a bit of an idea of just how quickly life has changed. I had my cousin Evan with me, my friend Jimmy, and his wife Sheila, who's Bob's daughter, and one other person I can't remember off the top of my head right now. And we're sitting up there, and Grandpa says, "Oh, I haven't been up this way." So I was 19 years old. And then I was on my way to Aiken Lake from Tobin Lake. And that's like, it's an easy 100-kilometer walk, right? And Evan says, "Oh, what are you doing up here, Grandpa? You're trapping?" "No, I wasn't trapping. Heard there's women's up there," he said. I said, "See, you had to walk a long way just to meet a woman back in those days." But that was nothing. That was just, I'm going to go see what's going on up there. Maybe travel up a little bit further after, and then, so you get that generation of people that are still alive today. They go down to Summit Lake. They've never seen this strange and crazy world that's going on outside of where they're from. And it's like, it's a sharp learning curve for a lot of people to do that. And the people that were coming up into the country, you know, a lot of them didn't really respect our people. And so it's like, sometimes that, you know, that division starts in a very odd way. But I know that that's one of the reasons why, like, my grandpa Bob and a lot of those old timers, like, they don't see a difference between people, even through all they went through. They've just found something in them that's like very powerful and very beautiful. And he's not an angry person. He's, you know, or some people get mad. There was some white people up there and they got a moose. Like, those white guys, they're hunting all our moose. And he said, people gotta eat. Those guys gotta eat too.
Makes sense.
You know, and he walked on, "Hey, good job there, young man," you know, this and that. He was all being really nice. And they couldn't understand, like, well, he doesn't see the world like that. He's not like us. We're kind of like a little more prickly around the edges, you know, and it's good to have the old timers to remind you of the fact that, you know what? Yeah, we have all these issues that we're dealing with. Yes, we're constantly battling. But people are people. There's good people everywhere. And if we shut off and turn our blinders onto certain people, well, then you're missing out a whole lot on life and a whole lot of experience.
Well, I think Uncle Bob's words is an excellent place to at least pause this conversation. I won't say stop the conversation. I feel like we've just started it. Oh.
Let's ask a quick question.
Oh, we have, okay, one last quick question.
You've obviously convinced us that these mega projects are a nightmare, especially for you people, but someone made a point about greenwashing that was very well taken, because I've been sort of proud to be in BC and using electricity that comes from hydro, and now I feel sick about it. Right? But is there a future for hydropower on a smaller scale? You know, because we're all talking about wind farms and we're talking about tidal systems and whatever. Like, it doesn't surely have to be as horrific as what you've gone through.
Well, we've actually
Definitely a quick question, yeah.
we've actually finally signed off on a deal with hydro for our biomass in Tsay. So, yeah, we were pretty. I was in an event there in Prince, and that question was asked to me, and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to say that had happened. So I had some people from hydro in the room, so I sort of put them on the spot, and they gave me the thumbs up. And so yeah, we've done that. Hydro's actually been really supportive of this film, and you know, supportive in a way to allow us to do a number of screenings and supporting it, getting out. We did a private screening with the executives and everything, and about a month later they flew up to Tsay and they said we need to make some major changes. And yeah, and one of the first things that had occurred was they're like, we're ready to move forward on the biomass. So that is currently happening. It's just incredibly difficult for people to really kind of understand without really knowing sort of the nuts and bolts of how these things operate. I mean, we've been dealing with hydro since 1966 when they first showed up to talk. And they didn't talk, they just told us, you know, you're getting flooded. And here we are in 2023, you know, and then late fall 2022 is when we're finally moving the biomass forward. I think there's a lot of projects you can do on smaller scale that can support a lot. I mean, I toured in Latvia and Germany and Italy looking at biomass and different plants and just some of the innovations in the technology. I mean, you don't even need to use wood to burn in some of that stuff. You know, I went to a rice farm in Italy where they burned the little rice husks, and that electrified their whole plant, and they had excess electricity that they sold back to the little town there, and they had excess heat and water from the plant that they sold back into the main community there. Because there's different things you can get off things like biomass, or you can even create diesel out of a biomass plant. You can create heat and electricity, and depending on what scale you're looking at, we have so much debris. I mean, I think they had said the piles that we had collected and stored for all those years was like 50 years of hydroelectricity for us through biomass. So there are alternatives. It's just, yeah, looking at, you know, you're dealing with a crown corporation that has a monopoly, and that's the tricky part. That's what makes it difficult to get these projects off the ground. There may be a lot of innovative projects that come out, and I've seen some where people have brought these things forward. We were working with Clean Energy BC and some different people like that, really innovative folks. But we had the blockade of hydro to get through. So it's not always easy. I think that if we can sort of remove that monopoly and allow people to, you know, make more regional decisions, there's a lot of different alternatives you can do to damming rivers and stuff like that. So some interesting stuff starting to happen in Quebec and some other places where some First Nations are now able to create their own sort of hydro projects and stuff like that, where before they had been blocked as well. So I think over the next 10 years, you're going to start seeing some more creative sort of hydro projects coming out across Canada that are more locally driven for specific communities and stuff like that.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Luke. Is there something you wanted to add to that, Heather? I'm sorry, pardon me. No, I'm sorry, that's my bad. No, please, take the floor.
I think just another thing to remember about this Crown Corporation is that anybody, because they have this monopoly, they were able to open that slab suit and just, I can't remember what I was going to say, but just, it really stopped and stemmed any sort of protest, because a slab suit means it's open to put anybody on that bill. So when we're talking about going through the process of working with BC Hydro, there's also a sort of vindictive side to them, it seems like. I don't know where I was going with that, but I just wanted to say that.
Well, perhaps we can, I encourage those of you who are interested, perhaps maybe the theater lobby or atrium is a good place to carry on some of these more detailed or deeper conversations. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking our special guests, our two directors, Luke Gleeson and Heather Hatch.